It's Thursday, April 29th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. It's the day after Election Day, and we're asking, what kind of a world will a Mark Carney government have to operate in? What kind of Canadian leadership is needed on the world stage? And what kind of global leadership is needed for these times? All right, folks, I'm just looking at CBC News here. Vote counting resumes with some key races still too close to call. Liberals to form government. Poilievre loses long-held Ontario seat. CBC projects. Analysis available. Carney's win caps a remarkable turn of events and sets up the immense challenges ahead. And it's those challenges that I've been thinking about for a couple of weeks, right? I was looking at this date thinking, okay, the day after the federal election, what's a conversation to have? And I was thinking about everything going on internationally and Canada's role and things that where we can play a role, but also things that impact and influence us. So, you know, you've got U.S. President Donald Trump. There's talk about European leaders and wondering what the EU is doing. There's the crisis in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, the passing of Pope Francis, and who may be next. With all of that, I figured I'd invite a couple guests in. And they've all been here before, but not all together at the exact same time. So we've got Lucian Ashworth, International Relations Prof, Memorial University. Justin Fantauzzo, modern Middle East expert, history prof at MUN. And Father Paul Lundrigan of Holy Trinity Parish in Torbay. How you all doing?
Good.
Good, yeah.
Good to be here.
Good, thanks for having me.
All right, so who stayed up late? I did.
I did.
All right,
Yeah.
Excellent. What time did you go to bed? I mean,
About
these are big questions.
1:40. It was when it was kind of sort of hovering around 59 to 61 for the 159, 161 for the Liberals. I said, well, I got to get some sleep. Let's wake up at 6 and see what's happened.
I've got the signal to be at for lunchtime.
Yeah,
I need
exactly.
to be fresh for Adam Walsh's show.
You know who has kids and who has older kids or who doesn't have kids
Yes,
by this
exactly.
conversation. Like, with a 2.5-year-old, like I was in bed.
I have older kids. Yeah, they were up later than I was. Yeah.
Hey, I have no kids, but I was in bed early
There you
too.
go.
You had stuff to do, right? You have a busy schedule here. What kind of a world for this next or new Canadian government, right, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, like we said, Liberals to form government. There's a mandate happening. It's still too close to call whether it's minority or a majority. We're still waiting on some of the vote counting to happen. But what kind of a world is the Canadian government going to be operating in?
Well,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, we could
Good
fill
question.
3 shows on that one. Yeah.
You want the long answer or the short answer? The short answer is only a few hours. Yeah, it's interesting times,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of everything's in flux. I mean, we've lived a decade in about 100 days, haven't we? So we've got the background behind this election. We had a geopolitical crisis that was influencing it. A lot of it sort of emanating from the US. We've got the end of our kind of economic system. It's kind of falling apart, and that was manifest through cost of living crisis, housing crisis, etc. And then we've got the ecological crisis, biodiversity, climate change, etc., etc. So we got kind of 3 nesting crises going on, and the election kind of handled about 1.5 of them.
Yeah.
I think he's got his work cut out, Carney.
Yeah, there's a piece here by Aaron Wary online. That bit I said, Carney's win caps a remarkable turn of events and sets up the immense challenges ahead. So it's on CBC by Aaron Wary. Part of it says, and we go back to the morning of December 16th. Back then, right, you had 4 months ago. That morning, Poilievre's Conservatives had a 21-point lead. Justin Trudeau was prime minister. Joe Biden was still the U.S. president. Trump's comments about Canada becoming the 51st state were still a joke. All that happening. Then Chrystia Freeland phoned the prime minister, said she was resigning, and the course of events happened. But talk about it a different, like a lot can happen in just 4 months, and here we are. So, Luke, you're setting that up. Justin, just thinking again for a Canadian Prime Minister operating on the world stage, what are some things that you're thinking of that is out there? Because for me, one of the things was a headline from last week of Carney talking about the crisis in the Middle East and Gaza and the blockade, right?
Yeah, I think this is going to be maybe a real inflection point for Canadian foreign policy, which has kind of receded into the shadows a little bit over the last 10 or so years. At least a less active role to play, I think, in international politics, in international crises. And I think the Carney government might change course on that a little bit, but it might be more in concert with our European partners, with the EU, with the UK, who obviously he developed contacts with when he was the governor of the Bank of England. Less so probably moving forward with the Americans. I mean, Carney's been quite frank about that this relationship is never going to return to what it was. And you can't deal with the instability of the administration in the United States, right? I mean, that's the real problem. It's not that I don't think you can't work with the Trump administration in any capacity. It's the capriciousness of the administration. It's the, one thing, it's 1 week it's this and the next week it's that. And especially if you're thinking of it from the perspective of an economist, a two-time governor of various international banks, stability is what they crave, is what they want. It's how they plan for the future. And the Trump administration gives us anything but that, right? Yeah. So I think we'll see that departures. He's already signaled away from the United States. But the question will be, how much does Canada kind of set off on its own, or how much does it just pivot to the EU? And
Father Lundrigan, I've been thinking for the last week and a bit of, the passing of Pope Francis. We're waiting for a conclave. And part of this show, too, it's thinking of these big world leaders, these voices on the world stage over the last couple of decades, and in this case with Pope Francis, and what they mean and have meant. Just to start with yourself, I mean, feel free to jump off of anything anyone says, but as we wait for the conclave to start and a new pope to be chosen, what did Pope Francis, what was his role on the world stage for influence?
I think he made a huge difference on the world stage because he opened up a lot of conversations that we had not been having as a church, and we had not been having globally among different economies, different countries, different political viewpoints. He stretched the church's role into a new realm of talking about the rights of people, the deportation of immigrants illegally, refugees, and the protection of their rights. He talked about environment. That was the first encyclical he came out with, was Laudato Si, talking about the environment and what we need to do to start protecting it, and calling on all government leaders throughout the world to participate in any actions that would help protect the environment, like the Paris Accord. He was also instrumental in dealing with the rights of people, LGBTQ people. A lot of people say he didn't go far enough, but he was the one who said we need to promote, if not gay marriage and same-sex marriage, same-sex unions. And we need to protect the rights and the lives of LGBTQ people throughout the world, particularly in places where their lives are at threat. So I think he opened up the church to a whole new way of being involved and immersed in geopolitics. We always were, but he's opened up whole new platforms that we had not been involved in before.
And these are all points that when you look at the U.S. president, we're in opposite land, right, for comment. So everything you just said that Pope Francis valued, you have President Donald Trump talking about a lot of the time pushing in the opposite direction, or pushing vastly away from it. What is lost then with Francis passing?
I think that the greatest loss is the fact that he was such a strong voice for so many things, and it wasn't just his agenda. He was trying to promote the agenda of a lot of different groups and peoples throughout the world, recognizing the inherent worth of all humans and of the planet. So he was trying to speak for those who did not have a voice, and travel to different places in the world where there were very few Catholics, but he thought, I need to highlight the needs of the people in this area of the world. So I think we've lost that. And that's one of the big things now about this conclave. Every conclave, there's always been the geopolitical situation that has affected it. In the public face, will say, we are electing someone who will lead us in our spiritual lives and follow the gospel. And all that's true.
Yeah.
But the reality is they also need someone who's going to be very strong and is going to be able to adjudicate between nations sometimes, be able to call people like Trump and Zelensky together, which he didn't get to do quite as he would have wanted in his lifetime, but in his death he did.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of that picture, right, guys?
Yeah, that's right.
You had two chairs together,
Mm-hmm.
and it's Trump and Zelensky at Pope Francis's funeral, and they're talking about the war in Ukraine. For the historian and the international relations professor here, when you saw that, what were you thinking about?
Well, I think what was also there were the pictures of Macron and Starmer.
Yes.
So what we were seeing there, and often state funerals are a great way to do this, and this was this was a major event bringing these people together, but it seemed from doing the sort of the Kremlinology here, the reading of the runes, that Macron and Starmer were playing the kind of the midwives of bringing these two people together, and of course coming at exactly the right time as the Russians, of course, had carried out their series of bombings, which had so upset President Trump and the White House. So there was a confluence of events there.
Yeah, I'm glad Luke pointed that out. I was going to make the same point, actually, that the timing here was fortuitous as well, right? I mean, this wasn't just a kind of diplomatic coming together to mourn the passing of Pope Francis, but this was also on the heels of the Russian attack on Kyiv. As Luke pointed out, that seems at least to have greatly upset the Trump administration, which has been saying for weeks, if not months, if not longer, that Russia wants peace, that Putin wants peace, you can work with them. And this is what you get sometimes, right? I mean, this is the cold reality of it.
And the last time we saw Trump and Zelensky together, it was a meltdown. In the Oval Office, right? Yeah, Vice President J.D. Vance there, and I remember watching it here on television. We're just like, oh, that went, and it went really, really poorly as an understatement. And now this one, apparently Trump said it was a quote unquote, it was a beautiful meeting. I'll tell you, it was the nicest office I've ever seen for his Vatican, which is, on point for comments from.
And crucially, Vance wasn't there. The world's worst diplomat.
Everywhere he's gone,
I know.
Tragedy has followed, right?
Yes, that's right.
You're listening to The Signal. It's the day after Election Day across the country, and we're asking, what kind of a world will a Mark Carney government have to operate in? What kind of Canadian leadership is needed on the world stage, and what kind of global leadership is needed in these times that we are living through? If you want to join this discussion, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us, 709-327-8206, or email thesignal@cbc.ca. We've got Father Paul Lundrigan here, a Holy Trinity Parish priest. We've got Justin Fantauzzo, modern Middle East expert, and Luke Ashworth, international relations expert. Both the guys are from Memorial University. Global leadership in this stage, right? We've talked about insecurity, instability. What types of voices do you think are needed to kind of shine through now in the coming weeks and months? And is it European? Is it out of the Middle East? Like, who are these leaders that might speak to healing and pushing things, moving things closer together, as opposed to pushing apart with everything that's going on?
I mean, if we're talking globally, I think the only answer is the European Union right now, and the kind of combined geopolitical, diplomatic weight of the EU, whether that's Macron or Starmer or a combination of various heads of state. Hopefully not Italian Prime Minister Meloni, but maybe. But if she can tag along, then that would be fine.
And she's seen as fairly right wing.
She's seen as fairly right wing as far as kind of politics relative to other European states would be,
like with migrants and
migrant issues, a kind of national populism. She's kind of jumped on that bandwagon as well a little bit. She's kind of on that side of the political spectrum. But I think the only answer right now is the European Union. I mean, if it is a question of, say, solving the current ongoing crisis between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Almost every peace proposal has had significant European involvement. I mean, more significant American involvement, of course, and equal involvement from Middle Eastern states, whether it's Qatar or Egypt or the Emirates. But the EU is going to have to be involved in that as well. And of course, Russia, Ukraine, I mean, it's inescapable that the EU has to play a large role there. And obviously, the United States has continued to show us over the last 100 days that the role that they previously played, whether you want to call it world's policeman or superpower or supra-power, I mean, however you want to say it, I mean, that role is no longer one they wish to play.
Team America's packed up their kit, right? Like it's not like it.
At least for this week.
It might,
next week it might change.
It might change 5 minutes from now.
Yeah, but I mean, every signal that they have given to the international community is that is a role for diplomatic reasons, for financial reasons. They often claim they no longer wish to play unless they're getting mineral contracts or something out of it, right? But so someone else is going to have to step in.
So does Canada matter for these discussions? Because sometimes I think Canada, middling type country of middling influence, depending on what's on the go, right? Yeah. And I think sometimes within Canada we overestimate our influence as a country, and something in Newfoundland and Labrador as a province for that matter, compared to what, like when you're in another country, when Canada comes up, not a whole lot, right? What I think, but I'm not an expert.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're talking about the kind of the big structural issues and so on, I think that may be the case. But if your question is about kind of leadership, then the fact that Carney is kind of linked in with this, going back to Justin's point there, he's linked in with all of these leaders. He kind of knows them. So there's immediately a kind of possibility there for building a kind of a coalition of the willing, for want of a better phrase. And I think Justin's right. There's a lot in kind of the European court, and even with people like Maloney tends to be a team player. The awkward person is Orban. And perhaps Fico in...
Putting it mildly.
Yeah, put it mildly, in Slovakia. But one of the other possibilities in terms of thinking about kind of leadership in the immediate is because we've got the COP coming up in Brazil, is Brazil stepping up, particularly on issues around climate change, but also other issues. So there are sort of other kind of voices that we might see emerging, particularly from the global south, from the BRICS.
I was encouraged, though, when I heard a part of Carney's acceptance speech, and he said that he expects that the United States will resume its role as, global referee, or again, however you're going to describe it. But if you don't, I will. And I'm not too sure what sort of influence Canada can have on the global stage to that degree. We're not a superpower. But I think his expertise in economics is strongly needed now with the collapse of economies globally. I think he could reach out to the EU and help to bridge some conversations there. So I think he might have a role there. And I'm encouraged that he stepped up to say that. I don't know how effective he could be, but I think he's got to try. And his relationships with the European leaders, I think, will help him to do something there.
Yeah, knows all of them. I found it interesting for his trip across the pond just as he became prime minister, and he meets with King Charles, and they knew each other before, right? And it's like, okay, well, this is not a new Canadian prime minister coming in to be like, hi, Your Majesty, and just figuring stuff out. This is someone who was the head of the Bank of England, correct me if I'm wrong, the first Brit or non-citizen to take that role. So he's operating in a space that he knows well. So is there something to leverage there for Canada? And influence, right?
And of course, he shepherded Britain through the entire Brexit process as well, right? So, I mean...
Not a small thing.
Not a small thing, but even putting the financial aspect of that aside, I mean, in constant contact with his European partners and neighbors who, the Brexit was going to have a significant political and financial impact on. I think, and maybe I'm kind of reflecting what the father and Lucian are saying here as well, but I think Canada might be able to play the role it would like to play.
The one we've always, countries always talked about a lot.
Yeah, we're saying, what role can Canada play? I think under Carney, it can maybe decide this time around. If it wants to play a larger role, I think there's a space as the father just pointed out. I think there's a space Canada for Canada maybe to step into and to start to assume that larger role. And if we want to continue to focus on domestic issues or try to salvage whatever relationship we have left with the Americans, maybe that's the path forward as well. But there's an open door here.
And I think just a sort of adding to that and a footnote in support of that is it seems that Carney is well respected within, people like Van der Leyen and within the EU structures. And so, often when you get a kind of a new government that kind of wants to go off and do something new, reach out to other groups, it isn't necessarily reciprocated. But this was kind of reciprocated well before the election. There's a lot of reaching out to Canada from EU institutions and EU leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's talking about policies and ideals and constructs that we've had for decades that the Americans have turned away from, right? Like turned away from Europe, turned away from now. There's from tariff wars to you name it, and yet the values are what Europe wants is still in comparison similar to what Canada is looking for on the world stage, right? How does it all trickle down from? Because I remember growing up, going to church as a teenager, and our Father Holland in CBS he'd take world events, right? He'd talk about them in his homily. Father Lundrigan, for yourself, like how does that, when we have things happening on the world stage, does it, like, is it you listening to your congregation, or are you also kind of taking things and then trying to take lessons for folks for conversation and to digest what is happening in the world?
Well, it's all of that. In my particular parish, we copied what they were doing in Rome in the last couple of years with the Bishop Synod, and it was a gathering of people from all over the world. 2 years ago, they started a new synod, and they invited a lot of people from around the world who were not bishops, lay people, including lay women. And that was a huge thing. And the process that they used was conversations in the spirit, where everybody gets a chance to say their view without being interrupted by others. We went around the table, sort of. So it was a wonderful process to get things out there, to start conversations, and to have people in power actually listen. So that's what we were doing in my parish, where we got groups of parishioners together, and they would talk, and I would listen. Because I get enough opportunities to stand up in front of them and talk, and they have to listen. But it was really a wonderful experience for me, because I was learning what was truly important to them and the issues that spoke to their hearts. Some of them were fairly obvious issues that I knew were really impacting their lives. But I was surprised that by some of the issues, especially around the environment, and how intensely important that was for so many people in my area. And the fact that the Pope was addressing that, and that world leaders were getting on board with it. They were disturbed that some were pulling back from it. And that became an issue for us to discuss. And the report that we did up, that we gave to Sister Elizabeth Davis, who was part of that synod process, she brought to Rome, and she spoke to it there as well. So we felt connected, that our voices were being heard. That's a big worry now with the conclave coming up. Will the next person who comes in be willing to listen and carry on these conversations and carry on the reform that's coming from them, and set an example for the rest of the world? And that, I think, is probably the best part of the role for a pope. It's not making new rules or policies. It is leading by example and listening to people. And I think he could teach whoever it is, new world leaders, to do the same. Listen to your people. Find out what's important to them, because I find that there are too many on the global stage right now who are listening to factions, influencers, and looking to build their own vision of what the world is and not serve the needs of their people and of the planet. So I'd like to see our leader, whoever becomes new leader, take on that role of continuing to listen, of opening up the conversations that need to be had, and try to teach other world leaders how to do the same through their example.
How different is this from when you first became a priest or first started with the church?
This has fluctuated a lot. I've been at this now for 37 years.
Okay.
The priesthood, that is. But Paul Lundrigan existed long before that, trust me. But I grew up in the post-Vatican II church, which was a huge council of reform in the church. And again, after the war, and baby boomers coming along, and the world was trying to rebuild. Pius XII had been a very dynamic leader in the church, very conservative, but very dynamic, very controversial. And they wanted another one like him. And they said, it's going to take us a while to really find the best person to take over history. So let's elect some old guy who can just sort of keep house for us for a few years. And then when he dies, we'll be ready to put in a new fella. And they voted for the man who eventually became John XXIII. Started the Second Vatican Council and revolutionized the church. We have had factions within the church globally who have been trying to pull it back.
Yeah, bring it back to Latin Mass days.
All these sorts of things. Or even just to put the reins, like, okay, change is needed, but whoa, let's not change too much too soon. We're going to lose too much. And I've seen that in Make America Great Again. Let's go back to the way it was. Let's go back to the glory days. And there's not enough people alive who remember exactly how unglorious those days were. And that, making a place great or making the world better is building on the great things that we had in the past, learning from our mistakes, and then building new changes that, while maybe scary, are good for us. Accepting new things in the world that we have never dealt with before. I've seen the push and pull of that throughout my lifetime and throughout my ministry as a priest. And there have been times when I've been frustrated. And people have said to me, why do you stay with this church that really doesn't like you and doesn't like so many other people? Why do you stay with it? And I said, well, it's like saying, why do I stay with my family after I've had so many arguments with my uncles? And I don't like some of the people in my family, or I don't like some of the things they've done. Well, they're family, and we stick together, and we try to make it work. I've stayed with the church because I see so many good people in it. I stay in this world because I see such promise for it. And that's what I'm hoping to see now come out of this conclave, a movement towards change and reform and building in the world, rather than hiding behind a notion of the past that is just completely false, and saying, let's go back to the glory days. Let's rein this in a bit more. Let's be the triumphant church and the powerful church that we were. And I see too many leaders, I don't want to name them, Trump, who want to become like that, who want to be the all-powerful leaders.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that in our church. Yeah. I don't want to see that anywhere else in the world. I think we need a leader, and I'm hoping that there's enough there, because Pope Francis appointed 108 cardinals. So 80% of those who are going to be voting for the next pope were appointed by him. That doesn't mean they were all of like mind of his, but I think he figured this is a person of good conscience, who is very left-wing or very right-wing or very centrist, but they are of good conscience, of good heart and soul, and I trust this person to do what is right. So we've got a whole variety of people who are, potential popes, papabile they call them, but and they come from left and right. We've got cardinals from Africa, from South America, from different parts of Europe, and in North America, more so than we've ever had before. This is the largest college ever. And so there's great hope that there will be somebody new and somebody who is willing to carry on the bold approach that Francis had.
What do you guys think? I mean, there's a lot there on leadership globally, right?
Yeah,
a whole lot. So anything to build on?
Well, I mean, building on that, because I mean, it's an important position and it's an important election, and but I was thinking on this that we're in a crisis. Going back to talking about the crisis, and in some respects, you can reduce reactions to a crisis to three. And it cuts across left-right divide. Yeah. You can have the reactionary response, and they're talking about people who want to the response to the crisis is let's abandon the modern world and go backwards. There's the kind of the keepers, which are the people who go, okay, you think the world's in crisis, but actually I think we just need to tinker with what we've got. We'll stay within the box. And then you have the dreamers who are trying to build a new world. And it's, I think, the interaction of those three kind of leadership styles. Yeah. And you're seeing it within the various people who are being put forward as potential replacements for Francis. Yes. Those kind of, sometimes one person is more than one of those categories too. Yes. So...
yeah, and then sometimes you get one special person who connects with another, and then you get deals or agreements or whatever made. But then if you have folks who are not clicking with each other, which is kind of wild when we think of like the importance of leaders on a world stage and what the fallout can be if people if they don't get along and don't see eye to eye and zag instead of zigging, right?
Yeah, I think if you read enough diplomatic, political history, the way decision makers make their decisions, you realize very quickly how much of it is built on interpersonal relationships and how people get on and where decisions are made, whether it's two chairs in the hallway of the Vatican or it's the back room of a cafe or something like that. I mean, if you read enough of it, you really do see how much that stuff matters, and the kinds of emotional and political baggages that people bring to those conversations as well can be critical to the way those decisions get made.
Mm-hmm. So then, what are you guys following?
Well, we've Australian election, which is looking like it could be like the Canadian election. The Liberal coalition was meant to be winning, but there's been a Trump effect, and the Labour Party has gone into the lead. So, and they're doing it with AV, with alternative votes. So. It's even more interesting than our own.
Yeah, what I think will be interesting kind of in terms of international politics over the next 3, 4, 5 years is how, and this is kind of building off of Luke's point here, how many governments or races kind of react to what the Americans are doing and how many to kind of actually play off of what the father was saying as well, chart their own course, right? Mm-hmm. Decide where they want the country to go, listen to their populations and hear their grievances, their hopes, their desires for the future and carve out a political path that has that in mind. We've seen elections in Europe, a couple of which, not recently, well, one at least, in Slovakia that Luke had mentioned, that have gone to the right. Mm-hmm. Orban's been in power for a while. Robert Fico in Slovakia has returned to power after being there in the mid-late 2000s. The Polish government as well is always kind of, dabbling in kind of right-wing politics. But then you have an election like Canada where we've gone the opposite way, right? Whereas you pointed out, Adam, months ago it seemed a certainty that we were going to elect a conservative government, and we didn't. The UK election of Keir Starmer. So it's a really interesting time if you're trying to, read the tea leaves. I don't know if you can read them very well right now.
Absolutely. All bets are off. It's a really good point. Yeah.
Folks, you're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Today on the show, it's the day after the federal election, and we're talking about world leadership, right? Leadership on the global stage. What kind of world will a Mark Carney government have to operate in? What kind of Canadian leadership is needed? And what impacts us? What influences us? What kind of global leadership is needed for these times? Right? These are big questions. But if you want to join the conversation, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Email us thesignal@cbc.ca, or you can text us 709-327-8206. We had an email come in, and this one was just yesterday, but it was about the election. Ladies and gentlemen, today it's from Valence Oliver. And it says, ladies and gentlemen, today we exercised the people's voice. We, the people, go to a political war today in the world's best democratic process and the most successful democratic style of responsible government in the world, in my humble opinion. I just voted and I was excited. I saw so many volunteers. I was excited. I heard French and English being spoken to me. I was so excited to see young adults manning the polls and the elders doing their part as guides. This is how to pass democracy on and how to reach out and teach the value of a single vote. No matter what mistake you have made, no matter what life you made for yourself or look forward to, this is the time we the people have a say in how the guardrails are put in place, how the populace should benefit, and how the Canadian identity is not just protected, but sustainable and prosperous. Have a great day, journalist, was the note. And it was sent into to the Signal. So thank you for that email. But yeah, we went through an election, and
very eloquently put.
Yeah, and not everywhere goes through an election so cleanly as the one that just took place. Right? There's lots. We're in a world where there's a lot of question marks under the health of democracies. Right? Where do you see that for going forward, and what we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, well, I think, an important point about that, I mean, absolutely right about the election and so on. But of course, democracy isn't something you do once every 4 years. It's also about the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Yeah.
It's all the time between elections. But yeah, it's sad when we find it refreshing that that an opposition party, that a party that loses accepts its loss. I mean, it shows actually in some respects what dangerous times we live in. Is that now, and it's not just the United States. We saw it in Brazil as well. We've seen it in another sort of form in South Korea too.
100%, right?
It's parties not accepting,
right?
Yeah. And it's this is the worrying thing. There is this kind of we were talking about the different kind of forces that are emerging, but there is an increasing kind of tension between democracy and people who support democracy and an authoritarianism. And it's an authoritarianism, again, that often defies left-right categorization. Because, going back to the Slovakia one, I mean, Fico used to be a social democrats. So, there's... but anyway, so there's worrying trends there, I think, in terms of a move towards sort of a more sort of authoritarian systems of government. We've got to be aware of that.
Yeah, accepting of election results, although I'm interested to see if the knives come out in the Conservative Party now and the finger pointing begins. We already saw a little bit of that between the Conservative Party campaign strategist and Doug Ford.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested. Luke's pointing here. I'm interested to see if we have our kind of conservative night of the long knives coming up here, where the factionalism kind of tears them apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's part of democracy, though.
I'm going to kind of come around to that point, which is, also not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. A healthy democratic response.
But then, what is the work of democracy, right? So, Father Lundrigan, I mean, you talk about the impact and influence of Pope Francis and talking to folks about building community. I mean, that to me, like a lot of what you said, that's the work of building democracy and healthy communities.
Yeah. Ironically, the church is one of the few places in the world where democracy really does not have a say.
Yeah.
It's more of a monarchy.
Yeah.
The princes of the church will get together in secret, and from among their own number, they will elect the next leader.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of people think it's monarchy and monarchical power, but it really isn't. He is very much a politician, whoever gets elected. You're trying to keep together a global church with over 1 billion people. So we are tied into the politics of the world. I would like to see that democracy come into the church. I would like to see a more democratic way of electing the leader of the church, because I think we've seen through Francis that this particular role does have a dynamic effect in the world. And I think anybody who becomes a leader on the global stage has a great deal of power. And, as a person of faith, I'd like to believe that God has some hand in guiding us and directing us, but I really don't think that God chooses who the next pope is going to be. I don't think God is that political. I really believe that it is up to the people. And I would like to see us have more of a say in how our church is built and how it unites us around the world and opens up the doors for a greater unity between nations. So, yeah, I think democracy has been a threat, and it worries me. And I know that there have been a lot of religious leaders throughout the world, and even within the Catholic Church, who have been fighting for a greater sense of democracy throughout the world and protecting the rights of all citizens and all people in the world, so that we have a voice in how we are led through this world. I think we would do better in the church if we were more democratic and modeling that as well, because I think that's part of the problem that we contribute to, in that we don't model a good way of giving voice to the people. I believe Francis was doing that. and I'm hoping we can start doing it more in the future. But it's hard to have any say in that when your leaders are being chosen rather incestuously by the leader that they appointed. You know, the future leaders are chosen by the Pope, and they keep tight control over that. We've had some great people because of it, but I think we could have even greater.
When you're a priest, what's it like once conclave starts? Like, how are you monitoring? I know it's a secret process; you can't know until the white smoke comes up. And like, what's your day like waiting for this as you wait for a new pope?
Didn't you see Conclave, Adam?
I
tried not to talk about that movie.
I'm just waiting for CBC to announce an explosion has taken place in Vatican Square and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel has collapsed. Then I'll know they're close to getting a new pope.
Yeah. But John Lithgow's okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Grapevines, not so much. But no, I would just I basically follow the news and what's happening there like everybody else. I have no inside track. We don't get any news from the Vatican being sent to the bishops and sent. No
secret
knows.
rotary phone direct line.
No polling.
Yeah,
right.
No, exactly. There's no exit polling on this except for black smoke. We find out when everyone finds out.
Right.
And I remember when Pope Benedict was elected. I was driving along in the car, and Peter Zosky announced it to me on the radio. And I thought, oh my gosh!
Right.
And that was a bit of a surprise because it happened so quickly, and wasn't expecting Cardinal Ratzinger would be elevated to that position, but he was. And then again, when he retired, that was a great surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And even though Cardinal Bergoglio had been a papabile, as they say, he had been considered before, he wasn't exactly a front runner in that particular conclave, and yet he emerged, and it was radical the way he emerged. For a lot of people, it might not have seemed a lot, but the fact that he did not come out in the brocade vestments and stoles and the mitre, he just came out in the plain cassock and bowed and said, "I need your blessing," rather than extending his hand. That was a dramatic moment for me. It was like, whoa, we're in for some major changes now. And that did come. That it wasn't a false promise. He continued that. I was amazed that for the last 12 years since he was elected, he has never changed on that idea that we must be a poor church and relate to the poor, that we must divest ourselves of a lot of these power structures. And, as he used to say, you need to be out there with the sheep that you're shepherding, so you need to smell like the sheep. So get rid of all the big houses, and I loved that about him. So I'm hoping I will be pleasantly surprised and not dreadfully shocked, but I won't know until the white smoke comes up.
Yeah, wait and see. So then for some of the other stuff that we've talked about on the show before, right? So war in Ukraine, crisis in the Middle East, and if we're thinking of this theme of leadership and global leadership, and Justin, I'm not asking you, what type of leadership will it take to solve the crisis in the Middle East, but But
what kind of leadership will it take to solve the crisis in the Middle East?
But I wanted it a little softer.
Oh man,
who needs to be involved with this to try to make progress into what is happening?
The issue is everyone's been involved in it up until now, and there hasn't been a lot of progress. It doesn't seem like that leadership is going to come regionally, let's say, as long as the Netanyahu government remains in power in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. It doesn't seem like it's going to come from the Arab world, which has a multitude of positions on the conflict. Depends if you're in Qatar, or if you're in Egypt, or if you're in Jordan, or if you're in Lebanon. I do think in that region we are starting to see a bit of a sea change that has been happening for... I wouldn't go as far back as 1979 when Egypt made peace with Israel. Maybe 1994 is a better place to start with the peace treaty between Jordan and Israel. But especially the last 10 or 15 years, we have been seeing a bit of a sea change where the leadership in the region has been coming around to the idea that, they've been at conflict for long enough. And a path towards normalization is the best option for everyone involved. In Lebanon, this is actually very often the political discourse that, what has 77 years of war with Israel, because they've never actually had a peace treaty. What has 77 or so years of war with Israel given Lebanon, right? A war every 10, 15 years or so. How has it benefited the Lebanese people, right? Which today are in economic ruin. The south of Lebanon has been, topographically destroyed in many respects. So there are changes that are coming at the kind of impetus of leadership, but it's slow and it's a difficult place to do it. The Americans have obviously been heavily involved in the process, but that doesn't always seem to go the right way. The EU has been playing a more reserved, kind of indirect role in the process. I mean, the UN has shown itself incapable of really kind of having any effect on the war in Gaza. So who do we need, or what kind of leadership do we need? I mean, a better American leadership is maybe the closest answer I can give you. A better American leadership that maybe is more willing than the current one to put its foot down on some of what's happening and encourage the two sides to find some kind of compromise.
Yeah, as opposed to having like real estate discussions, when like the latest story for CBC News is UN and Palestinian representatives at the International Court of Justice accused Israel of breaking international law by refusing to let aid into Gaza. On the first day of hearings about Israel's obligations to facilitate aid deliveries, the Israeli government, for their part, described it as a circus, and there's accusations of Hamas infiltrations in groups and terrorism, right? So like for where things right. So you have this going on, and then the question of the usefulness or uselessness of the American government and what the input is.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's largely been the Americans throughout this process who have pressed the Israeli government on letting more humanitarian aid flow into Gaza. That hasn't often been a decision that the Israeli government has made unilaterally. It's usually been at the behest of the Americans who have said, look, if only for, I hate to sound so callous, but if only for the PR of it, if only for the optics of it, you've got to let more aid in. So that, the kind of criticism of the campaign of this never-ending war and how important it is getting the hostages back, that can kind of recede into the background a little bit.
Yeah, and when you say aid, we're talking like the most basic form of like food.
Yeah, we're talking, bags of wheat, bottled water. We're talking rations. Medical aid in this case, we're talking antibiotics, bandages, disinfectants. I mean, really, really basic things. Turning on salination plants so that the water is safe to drink and dysentery and cholera don't spread. So we're talking basics here.
And then the other, I mean, Luke, you and I have talked about Ukraine a bunch. Like, what are you looking at now for because we started the show earlier on, Trump, Zelensky at the Vatican and that meeting. Granted, it happened. And
what happens now? Yeah, I mean, if there's a silver lining to all of this, is kind of perhaps giving an off-ramp for the Russians. We're talking about leadership. The problem I think we're dealing with Russia is, in fact, maybe an excess of leadership. Russia has, the Russian government, the regime around Putin has been exercising increasingly authoritarian control, but over a state that is economically and politically drained. I mean, we got an economy that's is finding it hard to find manpower, person power. People are being sucked into the military. It's a kind of on a war footing, but that's causing inflation because now the economy can't get workers. It's having to pay them more. So we got a spiraling inflation. We got despite the fact that you've got very strong leadership from the center, is you have a very weak government. And so, it's the situation is Russia's actually in trouble, and they do need an off-ramp. Now there are, and Justin's talked about this too, there are also problems that Ukraine has, running out of of people for the war machine and so forth. But I think that if you're talking about, again, this leadership issue, is that the one thing that Ukraine really has going for it is its leadership. But also that there's been a lot of reforms in Ukraine. Ukraine has a major problem with corruption, but they've managed to develop a civilian and a military infrastructure infrastructure that is far better than the Russians. So I think, again, this is a conversation that Justin and I had on another radio, is that the Russians and the Ukrainians really have opposite strengths, but they're both kind of need eventually a ceasefire and a negotiated settlement. The problem at the moment is, really, but especially on the Russian side, there really isn't a will to sit down and talk.
Yeah, I think on the just really quickly on the Ukrainian side, American leadership is still highly, highly important for what kind of weapons the Trump administration now will allow to flow into Ukrainian hands. Where they'll draw red lines, not green lines, but red lines on a map and say, okay, this is not going to be part of any kind of compromise, peace, or negotiated settlement. We saw how American leadership in the previous Biden administration critically changed the kind of armaments and equipment that Ukraine had. I mean, the Americans had many red lines that they crossed, especially in terms of anti-aircraft missiles and surface-to-air missiles, largely kind of pegged to distances. How far could you fire them? Because they didn't want to get embroiled in anything like, a rocket can hit somewhere in Russia.
Yeah, and Russia's a former superpower that has a bunch of nuclear weapons. So there's a danger.
Exactly.
Massive world-ending type of danger.
Exactly. Yeah. Even at times Ukraine had kind of floated to the Americans the idea of using tactical nuclear weapons in the Donetsk area. So the Americans still play a critical leadership role there. I think on both sides.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, of course, we mustn't forget the role of the Europeans, who now, and going back to an earlier point that Justin made about European leadership, is that increasingly the Europeans are taking an independent line on Ukraine. And with the exception of Hungary, they are far more hawkish in terms of supporting Ukraine, for obvious reasons, because many of them share borders with Russia, and they are worried that if there aren't security guarantees, it's Kyiv and Kharkiv today, but it could be Tallinn and Riga tomorrow.
I was just going to say the the Baltic states in particular have made that argument time and time again, right? Especially as it relates to the reliance on Russian oil and gas. Yeah. Right. So ramping up production of liquid natural gas in the Baltic Sea, especially because when you have states like Slovakia and Central Europe, who at the start of the conflict, if we go all the way back to 2014 in Crimea, were actually buttressing Ukrainian energy reserves by sending excess oil and gas that came from Russia actually back to Ukraine. But the new government of Fico has largely stopped that.
Pretty much we're 2 minutes left. Any final thoughts for today's show as we wrap up, whether it's global leadership, where Canada fits in with it, or anything else? Father Lundrigan.
This year for the church, Pope Francis announces, because every 25 years we have a Jubilee year, he's named this the Year of Hope. And I thought it was very appropriate. And I'm hoping what we have seen here in the election becomes a sign of hope in the way that you guys expressed how we had a really good election. It was very democratic. There was no fighting in the streets. There was no denying, how the results have come out. I'm hoping that we can be an example to the rest of the world, and also that we can take the example from good leaders going forward. I'm hoping that people have learned enough from the bad situations that we've seen, that we can start becoming closer to democracy around the world, unity around the world, humanitarian aid going to all people, sharing the resources of this earth. So I'm hoping that that sense of hope is coming out. And that's what I saw in the election, the way it unfolded.
20 seconds left.
Just say that there's a lot of crises out there, but we've got the tools to deal with them. The question is political will.
Yes.
Right. Justin, last word to you.
Let's see how the next 1,100 days of the Trump administration goes, and whether some
it's 100 days. Just
100 days. Let's see how the next 1,100 go, and see if some semblance of American leadership reemerges.
Right. I mean, lots of days there, so we'll see.
Lots of time.
We'll wait and see. Thanks for this, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, folks, that's it for today's show. Anytime you have thoughts for us here on The Signal, give us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca. Call the Signal line and leave a message, 709-576-5260. Tomorrow, something completely different. Well, speaking of 100 days, 100 days out from the Canada Games. The 2025 Canada Games will bring together 5,000 athletes, managers, coaches, 19 different sports. We're going to give you a preview tomorrow and talk about everything that's going to be here in St. John's this summer. It's going to be quite the show. Don't miss it.